Welcome to this panel discussion where we will be discussing whether the COVID-19 SMME impact research points to a systemic issue as far as the SMME funding readiness is concerned. My name is Darlene Menzies. For those who don't know me, I'm the host for the event and also the founder of Finfind, which is a fintech business working in the access to finance space. I'm really looking forward to the next 45 minutes and to getting input from our panel members. I think we have a really fantastic panel that E-Squared has brought to us today. I'll tell you more about that now. Just some quick house rules. I've been asked to request that everyone except us on the panel at this stage switch off your videos and your mics. We will have about a 15-minute Q&A session at the end, and then so feel free to write any comments, questions that you might have. They'll be tracked during the meeting, and we will ask those at the end. And if you are asked to ask a question or to make a comment, we ask you then to put on your camera and your video, your camera and your mic. So let's get started. I'm not quite sure how many of you have got to look at the SME COVID impact report. We have posted it in your comments box, and so whether you have a quick squiz at it now while we're chatting or have a look afterwards, it does contain all of the information about how SMEs were sort of really impacted in the first 5 months of lockdown. The research study really revealed some very sobering findings. We're going to go through a couple of those. The partners in the study included 2 of the panelists that are with us today, one being the organization E-Squared and the other SAICA Enterprise Development. And there were some other national partners such as the Department of Small Business Development, Services SETA, the Banking Association of South Africa, Business Leadership South Africa, among others. But the purpose of today's discussion is to look at this issue of SME finance readiness against the backdrop of the report findings. So I will be taking you through some of those key findings. But before that, I think let me introduce you to our esteemed panel members. Firstly, we have Llewellyn Fredericks from E-Squared. Llewellyn is the lead principal responsible for new investments and portfolio management at E-Squared. He has a great deal of experience in assisting SMEs through the startup, investment and growth phases of their businesses. Llewellyn, I really love the work that E-Squared does, and I wish there were many, many more organizations like yours. Please, can you just explain a little bit about what E-Squared does in a nutshell for the audience?
So thanks, Darlene. So E-Squared, we've been formed as part of a broader empowerment deal. We are the BE partner and significant minority shareholder of Allan Gray. Our mission is to attack poverty and change the unemployment landscape in South Africa, and we do that through investing in entrepreneurship. At the moment when we were established, we had 2 mandates. The one is sort of a captive mandate. We provide our funding to Allan Gray Fellows. Those are individuals that have graduated from the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation. And we've also have a second mandate, which is providing grants to social enterprises, both with a mission to solving, or attacking poverty, but more directed at youth unemployment. We've actually started, although we were established in 2007, we started investing in 2016. Our value proposition essentially is we start very early, probably at the stage before traditional VCs come in. And our sort of ethos is really to try, we accept it humbly, to try to build great businesses and at the same time also build great entrepreneurs. Because the individuals that we invest in are usually just out of university, maybe done sort of 2 to 5 years at their corporate gig, and then have decided to explore the entrepreneurial passions.
Wonderful, thank you. I love how you speak about humility and just your approach. I think we chatted a bit in the run-up to this panel about just the flux that the whole world is in, and COVID has sort of put the world on its head. And I think humility and approaching every situation, we're all learning, things that we thought we knew, have changed. And so I think, our whole approach even to this panel and to the subject is to each come with what we've learned and experienced in the past, and to try and find a new way forward together. So I really appreciate that input. Then we have Sonkoba from Perpetuate. Sonkoba is the co-founder and MD of Perpetuate. which is an SME implementation agency that focuses on closing gaps for SMMEs to enable them to scale, to grow and get funding. She really has vast experience in the shifts of work, business, and the workplace, and the need for that in the face of the fourth industrial revolution. And it's really wonderful to have you here with us. And Nkoba, I have a great respect for the work you do. And please, could you explain to us more about what Perpetuate does for SMEs and also the other stakeholders in the SMME sector that you work with? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Darlene. It's a real pleasure to be part of today's panel and really looking forward to it. So yeah, as you mentioned, MD of a business called Perpetuate. We are effectively a niche consulting firm that focuses purely on SMMEs, predominantly in SA, but actually with some SMEs that we work with on the rest of the continent. And our focus, like you said, is how to get more SMEs scaling and more SMEs funded. I think the reality is we have tons of SMEs in this country and on the continent, but we see very few of those survive, very few of those thrive, and very few of those actually attain the funding that they need for growth or for getting started even. And effectively the work we do is twofold. The first area is that we work in the strategy consulting space. And in this space, we focus very much on, is this a business with scalable impact potential? Has this business been set up in a way that it's going after a massive opportunity that is, bankable? But secondly, is this business going about it in a way where it has a clear competitive advantage? And we'll probably talk about it later, but some of that is it responding to the changes in technology and the changes that we see in business competitiveness? And then the second bit of what we do, which is the most important for us, is implementation consulting, where we're trying to really address the issue of there's so much stuff to be done in an SME and so many skills that are required to build a successful SME, but it's not always that those skilled professionals are sitting within the SME. So what we do is we have a database of over 2,000 freelancers and service providers. And what we do, we scope solutions for our SMEs and actually bring together a part-time or on-demand team in order to implement the solutions that are required to move that business towards scale or move them towards, being funding ready. And effectively, who we work with is obviously SMEs, but at times we also often work with funders. So great to have Llewellyn on the panel as, coming from the funding community, where it's about how do we make sure that the funder has appropriate pipelines. So in other words, get them funding ready to create pipeline. Or secondly, it may be now that we've invested in this business, these are the returns that we're trying to get out of the business. And we effectively then partner to assist with some capacity and specialist skill in making those happen. I think for us, it's very much about roll up the sleeves and do, rather than just advise and assume that all SMEs are the same.
Yeah, great. Great. I love how E2 and Perpetuate, there's such a synergy between you, because ultimately you're looking at the same type of organization that if they were bolstered and supported and properly looked after and managed to have a business model and reached out for funding, they could actually scale and really start to make a difference and lift the water level for everyone, more jobs, etc. So I think it's not by coincidence that you guys work closely together. So thank you for that. Last but not least, definitely on our panel is Annie McWalter. She's the CEO of SAICA Enterprise Development, and her organization is an enterprise that's part of SAICA, which work to develop financial excellence in SMEs by addressing key issues as to why a large number of SMEs fail. I've worked quite a bit with Annie. She's a delight to work with, and it's lovely to have you with us on the panel today. Annie, please, can you just explain a bit more about the services and the practical things that SAICA ED provides to SMMEs? Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. So SAICA Enterprise Development spun out from the Hope Factory, where we decided to put all our enterprise and supplier activities into one vehicle. And, the Hope Factory is part of, so is SAICA Enterprise Development, very much part of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. And what we dream about is really mobilizing the profession. We know that the profession makes an incredible contribution to corporate South Africa, by and large. But our dream is to see CAs and all of the profession. SAICA's not only got chartered accountants, we also have general accountants, AGAs, as well as accounting technicians, which is kind of like a bookkeeper level. We want to see all of them make a really valuable contribution to SMME development. And they can do that through helping SMMEs with their compliance aspects, but not only the compliance aspects, also the strategy, the business models. You know, we really believe that accountants will strategically be able to assist in these areas. And so we've developed a model as SAICA Enterprise Development for how this could happen on scale, partnering with our small and medium practices all around the country. But thanks for this opportunity.
I'm just checking that everybody can hear me, if I can get a thumbs up, because I've just taken my earpiece out. Are we good?
Better.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks, Annie, so much. I think, you know, both with research that our organizations have done together before and this last COVID study, it's very evident that the type of work that an accountant, the services an accountant provides into a small business are sadly lacking in a lot of those that failed. And so I think it's a point of discussion for later. But what I thought would be good is if we had a quick look at some of the key findings of the COVID impact report, so that we would understand the backdrop against which the panel was speaking. For those that are in the audience that maybe haven't got to it, I'm really going to only pull out a couple of key stats and things that paint a kind of a background picture. And if you want to get the nuances, you would have to go through and read a bit more of the report. But the report showed that nearly 60% of SMEs were unable to trade during the lockdown level 5. So from that March period through, especially those first 5 months, 60% of them were completely without ability to trade. 75% of them experienced a significant decrease in revenue. And sadly, 42% of them had to close their doors permanently. We're talking about registered businesses, formal businesses, businesses with bank accounts, businesses with staff, with decent turnovers that have closed their doors permanently. And so it's quite a staggering figure to look at. Between the businesses that closed and those that remained open, over 60% of full-time employees lost their jobs over that 5-month period. There was also a decrease of 70% in terms of part-time employees and 50% decrease in casual workers. And that has a really a big effect on the gig economy. And also to say that there was a 40% decrease in the use of consultants by SMMEs. So that probably points to the accountants and business advisors. So just when you need them, they weren't able to afford to pay them. So while this was from a sample of 1,500 businesses, so we took a sample of 1,500 businesses across all sectors from every province. So it was from a representative base. You know, if you look at this particular sample, even if you found those figures staggering, 42% of businesses closed, 60% of jobs lost, even if you had to generalize that across the entire sector and you had to halve it, for people that think that is, you know, possibly not a figure that can be generalized, it's still very worrying. The majority of the businesses that closed generated little or no profit. They already had existing debt. About 66% of them had existing debt, and they had no cash reserves. So this left them in a very difficult position and unable to weather the negative financial impact of lockdown. So with all those months of not receiving revenue and not being able to trade, with expenses still needing to be met, it became a very dire picture. So if we have a look at the COVID relief funding, because this is the area we really want to get into, 43% of the businesses that closed applied for relief funding, but 99.9% of their applications were rejected. So when you say just under half of the businesses that closed went to get funding, but only 0.1% actually got relief funding, which is staggering. And of the businesses that have remained open, nearly 50% applied for funding, 82% of their applications were rejected. So only 18% of them received funding. Now, there's myriad of reasons for that, and that's a topic for a whole nother panel discussion, and probably not one that we should get into now. But I think just looking at the figures themselves, we got to start to have a look at from the SMME's point of view, you know, why was this the case? We know there's a lot of challenges in terms of the funding institutions, and we can look at that. But from an SME perspective, it's noteworthy to see that 91% of the businesses that closed either had no management accounts or they had outdated management accounts. And as we know, if you've got poor financial record keeping, it severely affects a business's ability to manage their cash flow. And of course, it makes it almost impossible to access traditional funding. So as we know, SME finance readiness is the topic, the issue that we're going to look at today. And just to start off with that, I want to say that funding for startups and early stage businesses is a massive challenge in this country. We know that banks and government funding agencies are really struggling to service this vital market. And we know that something here has to change. And this is one of the reasons we're discussing this particular topic. So with that bit of unfortunate doom and gloom and just a reality take on where we're at, I want to address my first question to Llewellyn. And Llewellyn, I want to ask you if you could explain the difference between E-Squared's approach to SME funding compared to the normal SME funding provided by banks and traditional lenders. So what you offer and what banks and traditional lenders offer. And then how does your finance readiness requirement from an SME differ from maybe what a bank would look for in terms of funding them? If I could just leave that one with you.
Sure. Thanks, Darlene. A mouthful to begin with. I think I'm the thorn amongst the roses here, and I've now got the first question to answer. I'd like to disassociate myself from mentioning banks and government. They would be organizations that maybe we'd need to co-invest with at some point, but rather look at my reading.
Should we say traditional finance or term loan finance, and that if that's helpful.
Yeah, let's call it term loan finance, because I think that's the essence of the argument. So the way I think about it, I think if you categorize, maybe if I talk to term loan finance firstly, they deal with collateralization or securitization. So you need capital or assets in order to get the funding. So the bank, or not called the bank, the funder would provide funding on condition there's a guarantee for them to get something out. From an entrepreneurial perspective, the risk is significant because I think you as an entrepreneur you want to be entrepreneurial, but if you are sort of boxed into making certain payments, that reduces your ability to be entrepreneurial, which is the very thing that we require. I think the stress of avoiding payments, together with the stress of making payments, as well as starting a startup business, is significant. So I think just on that basis, it's not startup friendly. The term maturity and I guess the funding period, I'm trying to use very different terms so that we're not stuck in sort of nomenclature that are that we use. I'm trying to explain them to some extent. I think your relationship with a funder is bound by a certain timeline. Mm-hmm. And I think we've also seen, I think everybody knows sort of the risk of startups failing within the first 2 years is very high. And during that time, if you have term loan, your whole experience with that partner is regrettable. I think the partner, the funder, would just look to make sure that things are going in the direction to make payments, and you don't have a relationship beyond that.
Yeah.
The structuring, I think the structuring also plays a part. I think in some instances, term loans are structured, 50% amortized loan and 50% bullet payments. I think that that's, or some variation, and that is done really to decrease the payments during the term, and you feel like you can do it. But I think they cleverly named that term bullet because it kills you in the end. I think normally you need to refinance, but I think the funding rate is uncertain. So you're entering into sort of a situation where you don't have certainty of the future, which is again not startup friendly. I think I respect a whole lot of people in the banking industry and the like, but there's a certain sort of personality or profile of person that works in these organizations that provide term loans. I think they are finance, they finance graduates, they financially trained CAs like me. When I saw Annie, I thought she's gonna come chase my CPD hours, but luckily not. But so they financially trained, they executors, they follow established protocol, they're template driven. And the way they remunerate is often volume based. You know, the one thing that you mentioned of the stats, you know, I think of the number of people that have just gone through, applied, and not the funders haven't responded because they've been dealt with as transactions and not, you know, as individuals. I'm not trying to say anything wrong about the people, but I think that's just the perspective. I think from an E-Squared perspective, where we talk of patient capital, impact investing, I just want to get it out of the, you know, we always say equity investing is the most expensive form of funding. You know, it doesn't feel that way. And it's probably weird for me to start off that, but I just want to get sort of this sort of misconception. It is expensive if you as an entrepreneur need to give a slice of your baby, the thing that you're passionate about. And even more so if that baby becomes like a $1 billion company in 10 years time, and you know, your slice is less than the funder slice, and you're giving away maybe like 60%, 600 million. That's expensive. I think it's expensive for the funders also, because you're in it in the, you know, for the long haul. But you know, in order to get in that position, you actually need to be in a position of trust with you know, between the investor and the entrepreneur, and that is I think an important aspect that is missed from sort of the term loan. I think once you have that, once you values align, trust align, you sort of good to go in sort of a startup friendly environment. We have a long-term perspective. So even in traditional funders, you're bound by the term of your contract. Even with sort of private equity, you're bound by the term of the fund, which is 5 to 7 years. For us, I think it's important to have that long-term perspective in order to ensure that we are making the right decisions for the long term. There's no sort of fundamentally we are being responsible.
Great.
I think from an individual's perspective, and the people that are engaged in you know, people like in our team and other impact investors, it's multidisciplinary teams. There'll be so, you know, I think we need to understand businesses from different angles. I would classify, you know, the team members as builders, supporters. We have blank pages because, you know, sometimes we have to think out of the box and there's no templates. And our performance measures are also, you know, there's probably less importance on quantity, but more of quality. So we invest a lot in financial capital and non-financial capital, and we want to partner over the long term to really be in a position to create value.
Great. Thanks. So maybe if I can summarize in my understanding, and I think it's very close to home for me because I've raised a lot of venture capital in the past and been through, you know, also the term loan route, whether it be with a bank or a private lender or with government. I think the important thing is that, you know, when you talk about equity finance and people say, well, they don't want to give away a piece of their company. I always say, if you go to Woolworths and buy, you know, one of those small steak pies, and you own it 100% and you can eat the whole pie yourself, that's great. But if you go to the freezer, there's a pie that's about 10 times bigger than that in a box. And if you had to cut out a quarter of that and hand it to someone to eat, you wouldn't even be able to finish the rest of the pie. It was too big. And so, you know, as people like yourselves come in, they grow the value of the business so much that although your percentage ownership is less, the value of the business is so much greater. And so you actually got more power than less power. But often entrepreneurs don't understand that. So I think that's for another whole lesson as well. And banks also are looking, like you said, at collateral, at surety. They want to have a see if the business owner has got a good personal credit record, which often they don't have. And so it's a very different way. And I love the fact that you're saying you support the business, you've got the people that can come alongside. So I think it's a very different model and one that we really need to try and scale. I'm going to go over to Sunkorba now. And, you know, the issue of funding readiness is not only about having your management accounts up to date and your compliance in place and your paperwork in order. But it's firstly, and for me, most importantly, about the viability of the business itself. Does it have a viable business model? And I know that you work a lot in this area. Please, can you tell us a bit about the work you do in this area with the SMEs you assist and why you believe it's so important and really the starting block when you start to assess a business?
Yeah, no, Darlene, spot on. I think you know, like we all talk about SMMEs, and SMEs this and SMMEs this. And if you break it down and we're talking about micro businesses, you know, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, all of those are very different animals. And I would even dare say, even within each of those categories, there's a whole lot going on there. So I think that this notion of kind of single brush, single type of solutions, single, you know, approaches is one that we have moved beyond, I think, quite a long time ago. And I think sometimes that the support and, dare I say, sometimes the funding that's available does not take into, you know, into mind those nuances. And I think that's part of the challenge. And what we focus on, and you know, first and foremost is like, what do we have in front of us before we kind of pull out the arsenal and let's do this and let's do that. Let's first understand what's in front of us. And like you say, there's some businesses which are, you know, survival businesses, and it's kind of going to be hand, you know, to mouth, and that's kind of the business model because of how the business is set up or can be set up, and even, you know, what the appetite of the founder is, or even the size of the opportunity. And then there's going to be businesses which currently may be, you know, hand to mouth, but have massive potential to scale. You know, we often talk about this difference between commoditized businesses versus kind of innovative, potential disruptive businesses, which I'm quite passionate about, which is, you know, are you a type of business where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of competitors for exactly the same product or service that you offer? Or are you one of those businesses who's managed to break out and you only have a handful or no competitors, and your kind of first mover advantage needs to be maintained before you have copycat businesses come along? So it's like kind of some of the nuances around kind of businesses are fundamentally different. And when one looks at kind of, do you have what type of business do you have, it's important to understand and unpack that. A lot of, you know, sometimes entrepreneurs get very focused on their, you know, their solution, and this is the product and service we're providing, and sometimes actually forget that they have to be like really close to what the problem is that they're solving, or who they're solving it for, and therefore what the size of addressable market is. I think oftentimes we ask that question and don't get an answer. You know, who are you solving this for, and how many people or individuals or organizations are you solving it for? I think secondly, the reality is, and in many ways, COVID just accelerated some of the trends that we were seeing even before COVID, which is we're living in a very dramatically changing world where technology is being leveraged by a number of, especially SMEs and startups, to a lesser degree by large corporates. And technology is being leveraged to increase efficiencies, to decrease price, to increase access, and to effectively create a competitive advantage in product, service, or in back-end function that is very difficult to compete with if you are not also leveraging technology. So part of what we actually look at with our SMEs is, okay, cool, what's the problem you're solving? I care more about that than we do the solution you've come up with. Then it's around kind of how have you made sure that you've got a competitive advantage that actually allows you to go after most of the addressable market that's available, and where are there opportunities for us to leverage some of the trends and technology to make your business a better business. So I think all of those are quite important to have, like, you know, very clear answers, a very clear strategy around. Otherwise, we're not always sure what we're scaling, and sometimes whether it's even worth scaling. And these are the type of questions that a lot of funders ask you. So, you know, what is the big business idea here? How is it going to be scalable? What are your unit economics? You know, do you understand not just your, you know, looking backwards financials, but looking forward, what are your kind of projections and where you're going to take this business, and where are your gaps? Because if you don't know what your gaps are, how are you going to kind of partner with an investor or even support services to close those gaps? And like you say, it's important to have the regulatory stuff in place, because I will preach that over and over, because a lot of companies don't. But it's not actually just for getting the funding, it's for getting your house in order and making sure that you're building a sustainable business that people want to be involved in, want to buy from, want to get services from, and also want to invest in, because at the end of the day, that's what the investor's looking for.
Yeah, it's great. And I love your approach, because that, I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have a sound business model, you can have, all the trappings, but ultimately it's about, are you making money? And I say to a business, if you're not making money, you actually, you're driving a hobby, not a business. And so these are some frank questions that we need to ask ourselves often, because funders will obviously often get an application and, there's no real viability sitting under any of that opportunity, regardless of whether it's got the ability to scale or not, just from a lifestyle point of view. So I really like that approach. Thank you. Annie, I wanted to ask you really, why do you believe that finance readiness, or as you wonderfully like to refer to it, finance excellence, is such a challenge for SMMEs? What is the advice that you would give business owners who are struggling with it? So this whole issue of finance record keeping, getting to a place where a funder, whether it's an equity-based, whether it's equity or debt-based, where they're actually in a position to actually approach them. Why do you think this is such a big challenge for SMMEs?
Thank you. So one of the things I'd like to say is that your finances, your numbers actually tell a story. If you don't have the numbers, then you have no story. And often if we find that the SMMEs that we like to help are struggling with that story, of telling that story correctly. They don't have financial management systems in place. They might have the incorrect story. And the thing is that your numbers should be impacting on your business in terms of the decisions that you make. Previous GEM reports have told us that 2/3 of businesses, SMMEs and small businesses starting up in this country close. And it's usually due to financial reasons, due to them not being profitable or failure to access finance at the right times. And so we really feel that this is absolutely, if we went after this, we would be able to really grow an SMME, robust SMME system in the country. But as you mentioned earlier, that often it's when SMMEs are needing the accountants the most that they actually aren't able to afford them. But so there's the story aspect, but there's also the compliance aspect, which was also mentioned earlier. And, compliance is a prerequisite for access to new markets, for accessing the third-party funding. There is a direct correlation between compliance and your access into big business, access into any form of supply chain. You need to have your fundamentals in place. And I would like to actually just say that our financial excellence definition is maybe a little bit broader than financial readiness. And I hope you don't mind me taking this opportunity, but we've seen it in our work with SMMEs that it's about financial literacy and about the entrepreneurs actually understanding what their figures are telling them.
Very good.
It's about them running their finances wisely and having robust financial procedures so that we can get rid of fraud, that we can get rid of corruption. Okay, I know that's, that's something that is being rooted out, hopefully, in all aspects of business, particularly SAICA is taking a very strong stance on that in terms of, taking to task errant members who've maybe been, involved with that. But it's about making good business decisions based on your up-to-date figures, that you need to have up-to-date figures to be able to make good decisions.
Right.
It's about being fully compliant with SARS, with CIPC, with all the company legislation. When you sign up with SIPC, you need to understand that there are legal ramifications. You don't just sign up a business. So those are all these things that we are looking at in terms of achieving financial excellence. And one of the things we realize that small businesses struggle, maybe if they don't have any kind of background in finance, is usually it's fear. Fear is the biggest problem. It's the misunderstanding around SARS. It's around the fear of not disclosing, and we believe that fear can be plugged and helped by actually building skills. So
agreed.
Capacitate skills and knowledge, then that fear will decrease, and there needs to be a good support system in place for that entrepreneur. So that's, I think, where the struggle is actually really happening, is the fear and the kind of the lack of knowledge. And that is why the model that we have on financial excellence is not only about the up-to-date accounting and compliance and all of that, but it is about capacitating the entrepreneur through financial.
Very good.
It's about educating, it's upskilling, it's about financial coaching around the business, and that's based on up-to-date figures and
Very good.
So thanks.
Yeah, I like the way that you framed that, and having worked with you, I know that it is really comprehensive, and also just addressing, as Sonkorba said earlier, not everyone has the same weakness or lack of skill in a business, and it's about sort of baselining things and understanding where's your gap, and then making sure that the program can actually address that. The next question I'm actually going to address to Llewellyn and Annie, and I'm going to leave the last question, another question for Sonkorba at the end. But just to sort of set the context, helping SMEs with their business models, their financial record keeping and access to funding and that whole excellence side, we know it takes time and it takes hands-on assistance. And this is the approach that all of your organizations take to effectively assist SMEs. These kind of high-touch interventions are not sort of easy to scale, and because it needs skilled resources who are often in short supply, and the interventions can be costly, although they're the most effective. So I wanted to ask Llewellyn and Annie that while I know there's no silver bullet, how do you believe we could scale the kind of solutions that organizations like you provide to SMEs, because you are addressing these gaps, or are there new approaches we could take? So if I look at what E Squared is doing, if we had all the money in the world, or if you're in charge, or if you had a blank canvas, Llewellyn, what do you think we could do if you were well positioned, footprint wise, etc. How do you think it could be scaled? Annie, looking at what you're doing with SAICA Enterprise Development and the models you've got, I just really want to know, how can we try and make these approaches scaled and affordable so that they can get, to every person and every level in South Africa? Again, I know you don't have the silver bullet answer, but I just want to understand what your thinking is to try and get there. Maybe to start with Llewellyn, we've just chatted to Annie.
It's a mean question. I think from I can take it from an E-Squared perspective. I think having sort of the end goal is something very much just a work in progress from our perspective. I think you're 100% right. What we're doing is not scalable, and I think Paul Graham may have wrote sort of an article saying in order to when you start a business, you need to do the things that are not scalable, and we definitely are doing that. I think from our perspective, again, we go back to it's again the quantity versus the quality sort of question. In our view, I think if we back quality businesses, those are the businesses that will stand the test of time and will ultimately result in impact. And our impact is, as I mentioned, changing the unemployment landscape and attacking poverty. So, I get you. As we go on, I think as E Squared on its own, I think we will growing organically. I think at the moment we have one office here in Johannesburg. I think if we have proven that this model works, that by applying so much post-investment support, so much pre-investment support, so much hands-on support, that it does work, that it does create some sort of economics that's in the right direction, we would likely be in a position to get sort of the funders available to support us and go forward if we were to take on other funding. I think in your previous, I like that. I think the question of scalability is a very, very real one. I think in your 2017 Finfind report, I think you guys illustrated what is actually needed, the annual sort of funding requirements, and it's like a ridiculous amount, from 86 billion rand upwards. So I think you're always going to be in a position where you need to choose to back a horse, a jockey, a business that is going to do well, and throw all your, throw the kitchen sink at it. I think scalability for us is something that will happen as a consequence. So we don't have the golden path.
Okay, but I like what you're saying there. If you're helping the right SMEs, you're going to create the tens, hundreds, and thousands of jobs, and then everyone start. That is a domino effect that starts to lift the water level for each of those families and those communities. It sounds like utopia, but that is how it works. If you've got a business that's going to really impact at that level, and you get behind a couple of those, that actually, in your particular case, is the scale in terms of the outcomes. And then as that works, we trust that, we get, offshore investment that comes in to say, gee, I recognize this is a model that works. Let's plow a whole lot more money. We can see this works, turn up the volume here. So yeah, I like what you're saying there. Good. Annie, in terms of the ability to scale the kind of work that you're doing, I know you do work with accounting graduates, etc. Maybe you can just explain a bit of that and maybe any other ideas that you have.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question of how we can scale, and that's always the $1 million question, but I really do believe that we could scale possibly through greater collaboration, where we actually connect the different elements of the ecosystem. Ultimately, we would love digital platforms that could maybe assist us with that, things like Finfind, and, that's why we started having the conversations. But, I do think that there are people that are holding different parts of this ecosystem that could be very crucial. Like, for example, there are 8,000 to 9,000 small medium practices around the country associated with SAICA, who are SAICA members. We have those databases. We could tap into that. It would be better if we could tap into that digitally. But, these are CASA-led firms who want to service the SMME environment. Yeah. Often they struggle because SMMEs, your general SMME is maybe a little bit erratic, pays them some months, doesn't pay them other months. And so, sometimes there's those issues, but that's enterprise and supply development. We've been able to help with those kinds of issues in terms of sponsorship to a certain degree. And then, there's the introduction of that SMME to that small accounting practice. There's the young graduate who is getting the experience of doing the bookkeeping. And so their costs are reduced in terms of the actual, bookkeeping and the processing of document work. And then, you've got that quality assurance, so you can start to do those costs down. Also, if we can do this at a much greater level, we can have access, we can access economies of scale. Very good. That we can do, the greater the cost effectiveness, the more opportunity. If we've got a lot of these practices all working together, we are able to cover a lot more and do things at a much greater scale. So I do believe that I think it's through collaboration and connecting the dots of this SMME ecosystem and having a vision. And that's where we would hope that, the government has that vision for SMME development, which they do, but we've seen these things where government says we want to support the small businesses with all these relief funding, and then everybody applies and nobody gets access to funding.
Difficult, yeah.
So we need a bigger, just to, I say this with the greatest respect, but we need more than just talk around developing the SMME ecosystem in the country, and we need a concerted effort. And hopefully if we could collaborate and come with a common vision, we could start to really make that impact.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just the types of panel members that we have here and just the four of us together and who we represent already is can create a significant groundswell. And, if those resources are available and access to them could become affordable, then there's no telling what we could do. So, yeah, thank you for that input. We're eating a little bit into the Q&A time, but I want to ask Sankoba this last question, and I'm just going to quickly frame it. The COVID study showed that the majority of South African SMEs were not prepared for the online world of COVID-19. Nearly 60% of them had never had an online meeting prior to COVID. I mean, it's crazy to think now, but that's the truth. 60% of them had never used paid digital marketing for their business. And 45% of them cited the cost of data as an unexpected expense at this time. Now, that's another whole issue around zero-rated data, but the fact that, they hadn't had even an online meeting. And Takoba, I want to ask you, what advice do you have for any business owner in the audience to ensure that they're better prepared to weather the future shocks like the one that we just experienced with lockdown? In light of your, how you position business with 4IR, understanding that, the businesses weren't prepared for this, a couple of just key tips and things that you could suggest to people to make sure that they're better prepared. And it's a horrible ending question, but just to share that.
No, sure. Thanks, Darlene. I think the reality is that we're going to have more shocks in the system, right? Whether it's COVID, whether it's digitization, and some even say that kind of like pandemics and endemics, where it's like more biological, is going to be more kind of the norm than we've experienced in the past. So, and spot on when you say there's like the reality of kind of the fourth industrial revolution, which I know has become kind of a overly utilized kind of buzzword. But at the end of the day, the essence of kind of the era that we're in is an essence where more and more we're seeing a merging between our physical world and the digital world, right? So, we don't think about it, but, like just GPS, Google Maps, and kind of how you use that, you're so comfortable going between the physical world and the digital world, and it's becoming, this panel discussion, great example of that. And I think that's going to continue to become more and more of the norm. I've seen some studies that talk about, obviously companies and SMEs have had to pick up digital because of COVID, but if anything, it was already an existing trend that was growing in adoption even prior to COVID. And, the prevailing research says that it's really just accelerated that adoption, and kind of more people will continue this way or in a blend or hybrid of physical and digital. And that's effectively what this fourth industrial revolution is. What does that mean for small businesses? I mean, it's partially good news and partially bad news. The good news is that if anyone's like kind of well positioned to take up technology, take up this blurring of lines between digital and physical, and pick up technology and integrate it into what they do, it's SMEs, because they don't have legacy systems, they don't have massive hierarchies of organizations and tens of thousands of people that they're needing to get to adopt the change. So that's the good news. The bad news is human beings just don't like change. So what it means that we've got to constantly challenge ourselves for how we're building our businesses. Are we building, for me personally, as Perpetuate, it's been like we're building a consulting business. Do we go out and build a consulting business the way that a consulting business was built 50 years ago, 100 years ago? We'd be foolish to do it that way. We have to do it in a different way that is more competitive, that is more efficient. So a simple example just in how we've gone about this business has been, while there's technology, there's actually an abundance of resources, even though, sometimes we focus on the scarcity. So how do we tap into professional resources for SMEs in an affordable manner? And it hasn't come from hiring hundreds of consultants who are not the cheapest out there, but it's come from actually procuring what we need. If all we need is kind of 2 hours of one of the CFOs from Annie's World, that's all we're procuring. If we then need, an hour of time from like Llewellyn and helping a business get a financial model in place, that's all we're procuring. And on the balance, what we would have paid a CFO for a salary for a full year, we've been able to do some marketing, we've been able to do some finances, and we've been able to build an investment case. And I think businesses need to think that way. And there's certain trends that I want to highlight that are effectively becoming the norm, which is there's so much information available. The question is whether you've built solutions that leverage that information. Kind of gone are the days where information was this pricey thing that you couldn't access. The other one is we're in a world where like a 5-year plan, needless to say, is dead. And as a business, you need to be quite flexible around that's the North Star that we're chasing. And we're going to be flexible and experiment and be innovative in how we reach that outcome. And at the end of the day, it's also about like, you don't need to own everything. I mean, just this example I've used about own the CFO and hire them full time. We're moving into a rental or shared economy. So can I borrow that, and use that when I need it in order to build the business I'm, building. And ironically, we're in an era which is amazing for small businesses where smaller beats bigger. we're seeing tons of startups who are literally eating the lunch of large corporations that have been around for years with tens of thousands of people with a fraction of the number of employees.
Yeah,
I think
very
that's
good.
an opportunity that continues. And when these shocks happen, if you've adopted digital, if you're smaller beats bigger, if you're flexible in your approach, if you're, you know, borrowing stuff instead of owning it, you have a lot more leeway to figure out how you respond to the shock that's
very good
in that moment.
Yeah, I think there's another whole discussion there, and I'm looking forward to having more of that with you. And, you know, the small business, we're agile, we're better hustlers, and I think we actually set up for the season ahead. So while it's a doom and gloom painted picture, even in the study itself, when we asked all those SMEs after all of those hard questions of failures, the incredible tenacity and optimism that came out of them to say, no, there's still a way forward, and isn't that what we love? So good. Thank you for all your input. I'm not sure. I think Sipho has been just curating questions. I don't know if there are any questions or comments or anything to be shared. Can I hand over to you, Sipho, to take us through that?
Thanks, Darlene. Indeed, I think that there've been, many comments, mostly really, agreeing with much of the sentiment that's been shared here. And a question from Kumo maybe is worth me just sharing. And then Kumo, you're welcome to also, maybe be, come on and give a little bit more to this. But she's saying that the report indicated that there were quite a lot of rejections by the banks and that of applications during this COVID period. And given that, SMMEs, are the backbone of the economy in order to improve the growth of the economy. So what the question is, what are the various stakeholders doing, or what can be done, I guess, also to reduce the number of rejections and the root causes thereof? I think maybe that's quite a chunky one. Let's leave it there for now.
Look, I'm happy to go first. So
okay.
One of the things that we, what a lot of the banks are requiring are those up-to-date financial documents. So their management accounts, annual financial statements, bank statements, your compliance is up to date. So those are some of the things that we definitely are helping our entrepreneurs get, ready. But I do think that what we saw, particularly with that relief funding, is that it was the same criteria that banks are always using, which is what Llewellyn was speaking to earlier, is that they are looking for surety, they're looking for collateral, they're looking for monthly income in the bank account. These are all reasons why a lot of small businesses really struggle, particularly if they don't have a model where they've got like a monthly income. Perhaps they are doing big projects and it comes in fits and starts. So these are all reasons why I think, a number of those businesses were not successful. And it was unfortunately, the same criteria that banking always uses around kind of giving that type of, so just from our perspective, thanks.
Maybe what we can say too is we work with probably about 400 different funders across the country. So it includes the banks, but also the private lenders, anyone, all FSP accredited or registered. And what we started to find is that banks are held into this one-size-fits-all model. So they take commercial lending. So whether it's a micro business, a small business, a medium business, they're looking at the same thing. So they're looking at the owner's personal credit record first as a gate. Now, of course, most good entrepreneurs have a bad credit record because we spent our lives trying to borrow money because nobody would give it to us. And so you're not paying often your own accounts because you're running late, couldn't pay yourself a salary. The realities of a good business, that's not a bad business. And then the other thing they want is for the business owner to give 3 months personal bank statement so that they can see a regular salary going in on a regular day. And we know that that's not the real world for the average early stage and growing business. And then, of course, they want collateral. And in when you look at our disadvantaged history, a lot of people applying for funding don't have parents that might have assets, don't have assets themselves. So what we've done is we've partnered with the World Bank and the National Credit Regulator to say, can we look at what we call alternative data? What other data can be provided that are not in this very formatted, templated way, as I like Llewellyn said? You know, how can we get data points from a business that in the background actually builds and creates their income statement and their balance sheet? So instead of saying to them, can you give us your income statement, balance sheet, which they don't have and they don't know how to get them, they're not yet being able to get to the accountant. We say, well, we ask them a number of questions. So there's a new project that's starting to have a look at, and it's a global project, and they've chosen South Africa as the sort of the key pilot for that. So, you know, just to say to Kumo, there are some, you know, it is being recognized that, you know, like Einstein said, if you keep doing something the same way and expecting a different result, it's not the wisest thing. And so different approaches are being taken. That said, outside of equity opportunities like what E Squared is doing, there are private lenders that are doing term loans and that type of funding, but they are allowing more risk. Obviously, the interest rates are higher, but they're doing, you know, moratorium on payments, but they're looking at different data from that business. They start off just with the bank statements. They look at the business and they start, instead of asking for the business plan and all the heavy rigor that often a business can't give. So it's point taken that what's happening at the moment has got to change. The likes of the Llewellyns and Nkorbas and Annie that really do see the way forward. You know, we need to stir up a groundswell of more people like that. And then within the funding industry and sector, data is starting to show them that there are good, viable businesses sitting there that if you look at them with the wrong lens on, you can't actually see. You know, it's like you beggars on buried treasure. So we're starting to lift some of that treasure. But a very good question, and things will start to change. Sipho, anything else that you want us to address? I think we've got about 1 or 2 minutes left.
At this moment, not really questions, but I think what's coming through is this element of what you just talked about, Darlene, around you know, trying to look at things in alternative ways, because you know, there's a view that the way that we've been doing it is almost like looking at it as though we are, you know, in the developed world, where perhaps, you know, there's a bit more access to things. Maybe there's a little bit more understanding and sort of like, you know, capacities within the small businesses that operate in those spaces. But I think certainly, I think that this is maybe a topic that should be investigated, maybe a topic for another discussion around what are some of the alternative ways that you know, funders, ecosystem enablers, you know, can sort of, you know, bring to the table. I like what Annie talked about around
collaboration.
You know, collaboration, yes, very, very good points.
Yeah. And you know, the one unfortunate thing about we are essentially in a developed country in the sense that we have such a strong banking sector, but it's actually to our disadvantage as SMMEs, because they have the muscle. They actually can prescribe these collateral requirements, etc. If you go into other countries further north where they don't have a strong banking sector that's not as concentrated, you know, that type of opportunity muscling doesn't happen. And there's also the OECD countries of which we belong to, there's a requirement to report on how many people apply for funding, how many were rejected, what interest rates were offered of those that did, was there default. None of that gets properly reported in a South African context. We get it at a global figure from the Reserve Bank, and it tells us this was the lending figure, but you don't know how many small businesses or micro businesses were in there. There could probably be 10 medium businesses with big quantums, and that's what makes it up. Other countries are forced to, and I think, you know, from a muscle point of view, we can't certainly muscle that, but there are ways with these projects like the World Bank where we can start to encourage more transparent reporting, because once we got the reporting, people like us can start to change the problem. So, yeah, I think this has been a very helpful discussion, and it probably elicited a couple of interesting things that we might be able to get onto a topic again. But just now in closing, I don't know, Llewellyn, one nugget, very quick, one nugget for SMEs out there. What advice would you give them to become finance ready for funding?
I think you need to get out and actually do something. I think you know, entrepreneurship is a doing word. So I think, you know, everything that everyone mentioned in terms of getting the business plan right, the governance, the compliance right, I think those are elements that needs needs to be done. It's often those unsexy stuff that cause the most the most problems. So I think there's an environment also of hype. You know, I think people think entrepreneurship is doing pitching competitions, but you know, I think at the end of the day, it should be people that are doing the work, getting recurring revenue, making sure that they able to report, disclose that revenue to the relevant parties.
Great.
I think we need to see traction. Yeah.
I'll sum that up to say that sales will bring in the business, but only the unsexy record keeping will keep you in business. So you decide what you need. I've given as he called himself, the thorn among the roses, the last word. And I'd just like to thank you all out there for joining us. Thank the panel members very much for their time and just their very valuable input. I found it very insightful. Thank you to E-Squared for hosting this wonderful panel. And we look forward to getting the results of those polls. And take care out there and keep safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.